Your business will absolutely die if you do not embrace social media. Zach, that's what I heard today this morning as I was listening to Gary Vee, who, if you're not listening to Gary Vee, you should be. What are your thoughts about that? And with the business that you're in, and
Sure.
we'll get to that here in a second.
No, I agree. I know for Goshen Valley, we feel as a mission that first and foremost, you have to create awareness around your work. So social media has specifically created avenues where we can let people know about events, about opportunities, and allow that to be kind of the first touch that then drives them to some degree of engagement and interaction.
Right.
I also think it's a great way to thank people. Sure. In our work, we have companies, corporations that come in contact, with our mission, and they bless us in different types of capacities related to the kids and the children we serve at Goshen Valley. No better way than to create ways where we can thank them publicly, through social media. That also, in many cases, allows them to then share that both to their own people and to their own network.
Right. So, not really the reason I brought you in here
Sure.
today, but I thought it was an interesting comment when I was listening to Gary Vee, and I'm thinking about the conversation we're going to have today, and I'm thinking, how does social media really play a role in the world that you live in? So do everybody a favor. What world do you live in?
So my name is Zach Blend, and I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the Goshen Valley Foundation. Goshen Valley exists to provide peace and purpose in the lives of children and families living here in Northwest Georgia. A majority of those children are living within the state foster care system. Today, Goshen cares for over 140 kids in 3 different environments, including our ranch in Waleska, Georgia, that serves teenage boys. We have a foster care initiative where we recruit and license families to serve children in their own homes, specifically sibling groups. We also have a program for college-age youth that are still in foster care and working towards independence through graduating high school, starting a career track. That work has been something I've been a part of directly for 15 years, but my family started over 25 years ago on a piece of property that my mother and father purchased in Northwest Cherokee County. Most recently, Darren, we've been able to also shift a lot of our focus toward prevention and how Goshen can provide counseling and therapy to families that are in crisis, but not yet experiencing foster care.
Right.
What does it mean for us to come in contact with them in their immediate need, not only help them through therapy, but also recognize, other circumstances they might be facing, related to affordable housing, job security. How can we work with other partners in the community to help them stabilize as much as possible?
So you just listed off several items
Sure.
that you guys handle. I mean, what is the next step? I mean, you guys seem to be covering so many aspects of whether they're deficiencies in our community or obviously need for help, because you've seen massive growth over the last several years specifically, right?
Yeah.
So what are you missing? What is the next piece of the pie that you need to add to take it to an even a higher level?
It's a great question. And, when you think about our mission of peace and purpose, I want to remind people, even with the growth that they've seen in Goshen, that it is about progress, not perfection. So there are all kinds of efficiencies that we can continue to improve on internally in how we care for our kids. How are we more trauma informed? How are we more connected to partners here in our Cherokee County community? But honestly, our thought is, how do we take our services and scale them throughout the Northwest region of Georgia? Mm-hmm. We've already started some of that work with the satellite office in Cartersville that's providing preventative-based services. But I know, not unlike Cherokee County 20 years ago, there are a lot of needs here in our part of Georgia related to families that are at risk in ways in which Goshen can help. And we're thinking long and hard about what it will look like to move in that direction and to serve families well.
So looking at a couple of months back in January,
Sure.
You came to the Woodstock Business Club, gave us a great presentation about 3MC, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit.
Sure.
But, we talked about the massive growth that you've had. I mean, you've gone from, when you took over, if I'm not mistaken, it was 4 million. Now you're 14 million, and probably be even higher at this point. 100 kids at that. I think it was in '02 that I read, and now you just said 100. I had 120 written in my notes, so now you're at 140.
Yeah.
And then 2 locations to 4 locations. But what I noticed was the biggest growth, and I had to look this up because I didn't recall it, but was wrap services.
Yeah.
So explain what that is.
Sure. When a family comes in contact, typically with the judicial system, related to circumstances where a child or a family member has been deemed at risk, often the courts, which will engage the family directly, some of which is punitive, some of which is more, I think, teaching based almost, in the sense of the expectation that they engage in services where they can have a better understanding of why they've made previous poor decisions, how they can be in a better position to parent well, how they can create healthier environments. So for Goshen, that type of wrap service might include family counseling. We have a clinical staff that will now meet with families, both assess through an assessment or whatever maybe has been shared through the courts, to be able to understand what needs are in place, but also be able to assist in circumstances where that family may need transportation. There may be a need for supervised visitation. There may be a need for like English second language services. So Goshen is now complete in the thought that we can truly kind of wrap the family with a certain amount of protection that comes through qualified services that over time drive them into a healthier circumstance.
Wow. So your father started the company or the foundation.
He did.
And so was that growing up? Is that something you knew for a fact? You felt strongly that you would be the CEO, you'd be running the foundation, or were you forced into it? What was the nepotism process?
Yeah. Absolutely not in the case that I think, as a junior or senior in high school, that I, years later would be, leading Goshen into the future. I graduated from Holy Innocents down in the Atlanta area, attended Rollins College, where, like, most young men, part of a fraternity and participated in intramurals. Was actually hired by a consulting firm out of Rollins that I went to work for a while in the Orlando area. But like a lot of kids in the early 20s, really kind of didn't find myself until I had actually returned home. Was living in all places, my parents' basement, which a lot of us have experienced at some point.
Sure.
But it was around that time in my early 20s. I remember my father pulled me aside one day. He said something I'll never forget, Darren. He said, "Zach, you've got to stop feeling sorry for yourself and find somebody to serve." At that point, Goshen was 5 or 6 years old. He was doing a lot of the heavy lifting, both in the time he was spending there, while he was also balancing a career in private equity. The Blend family was financing the project. The Blend family was at a point really kind of the core entity before all these partners in Cherokee County kind of came into play. But a lot of kind of in tune with what my father laid out that day, I agreed that I would start to spend time with him at the ranch. And that time included starting to get to know some of the boys. Hear their stories about their circumstances, what they had faced, what was ahead of them, what they were hopeful of. And on those days, I know that I would leave and we'd start our trek back into Buckhead where we lived at the time. I would feel a sense of purpose, like my time had been meaningful. And around that same time, I was fortunate where I met a girl, Rachel Blend, who would later become my wife at a local church. And as we talked about our futures together, we talked about how Goshen was at the core of both of our call and the sense of purpose and being able to step in and provide attention and care, and prayer in the lives of these children that were otherwise, for the most part, orphaned at that point. So that started in 2010. Rachel and I were married and moved to Cherokee County. I made the decision that I was going to kind of go full-time with Goshen. And I was still working on the property, pretty much on a daily basis, kind of understanding kind of the ins and outs of child welfare. But I was also starting to take a little bit of a lead in the community, where I had the chance to participate in Leadership Cherokee through the chamber. I joined the Rotary Club. We started to partner with local churches like First Baptist Woodstock and Woodstock City. So I was experiencing both the importance of quality care, but also the resources that were needed in order to both sustain the program at that point and what it was, and start to think about ultimately what it could become.
That piece of property, we had the pleasure of filming up there about a year and a half ago, and what a beautiful piece of property. And I just didn't realize, everything that the ranch actually does, and meeting the young men that were there, because it's a boys' ranch, correct? And so, I don't know, I guess the perception I had of a child that lives in a facility or a ranch like that was not what I was expecting, and totally changed my perception on what these young men, who they are, what they want. They have dreams, they have visions, they want leadership, they want to be leaders, and so it was really an eye-opening experience. So thank you for allowing us to be up there, first of all. And you guys are really just doing tremendous work up there. I can't say enough great things. And if you're watching this and you're in Cherokee County, I highly recommend you get an opportunity to check it out in whatever capacity that would be like. But community. It's incredibly important. I had a young man come into the office today. He's in his mid-20s. He asked me, what is something that you would recommend that I do to start my career? He just graduated from Life College. He's becoming a chiropractor. He's got all this student loan debt. He's starting out right out of the gate on his own, so small business. And he asked me, what is the number one thing? I said, you got to get involved in the community, number one. In whatever capacity that is, whether you're started at the Woodstock Business Club. I told him, don't just do the business club. Do all the other networking groups, the Rotary. I didn't even think to mention the Rotary now that you mention it. But be in there as much as possible and offer, donate your time. I'm not talking about donate financially. Donate your time, be there, and be in front of people and just talk and listen.
I think it's very important for young people especially, the opportunity to realize that not only do they have gifts and skills that can serve themselves, but that they can also serve others. Right. It's an important time in anyone's life when they kind of go through that season. The other thing that's neat about working with nonprofits, it's not just that you're serving an entity that's in need. That's really important. But it's also understanding, how does the entity itself do this work? How is it sustainable? Right. How can I come alongside the leadership of a local nonprofit and help create opportunities for them to have a larger platform, or for them to serve with scale, or with greater efficiency? Because in most cases, those entities, especially those that are just starting, rely on volunteers being that boost and that leverage to help them kind of get off the ground.
Well, I think you said something to me on the day we were at the ranch, is that a lot of people don't realize that nonprofit, a 501c3 or whatever it is, it's only a tax status.
Correct.
Right? So
we still have payroll at Goshen Valley.
And you have to be able to produce income in order to pay that and make those payrolls, right? I mean, you think about the hospitals here locally, they're nonprofits.
Yes.
And those CEOs and are making significant amount of money, but they are a nonprofit. So if you're running a nonprofit, it doesn't mean you have to be 100% funded via donation. I guess
sure. There are plenty that are based on kind of variety of revenue streams in the sense of creating sustainability. I will tell you, in almost every case, it's harder to run a nonprofit than a for-profit, when you consider all the compliance mechanisms, when you consider the balance of time spent trying to just raise refunds and raise resources and awareness, while you're also trying to ensure that your programs are of a certain quality and standard. It's been a learning experience, and I feel fortunate. I learned a fair amount from my father, who himself, dating back to serving as a salesman with IBM back in the 70s, to working for Insight Capital out of Manhattan, later in his career, he certainly brought some of that understanding to how we ensure that we have a program that is sustainable and scalable, but at the same time, there has to be systems in place. You have to have a framework that allows you as a nonprofit and really as a small business to understand when you emphasize certain aspects of mission, margin, morale, to be able to drive something that you're proud of.
And that brings up the presentation that you did at the Woodstock Business Club, was your 3MC.
It's a concept and a framework that I've developed over time. I try to share 3MC as much as I can. especially with my own team. We have 5 or 6 operating agencies within Goshen Valley Foundation. And almost all of our leadership came from a kind of a social welfare background. So we've had to be able to train them just on the business acumen of being able to drive a ministry that's sustainable and scalable. That framework for me specifically, as you mentioned, is 3MC. It's the balance. It's also understanding the emphasis of mission, margin, morale, and compliance.
Right. I want to get into this a little bit more,
Yeah.
but I want to touch bases on this because you're working with folks that clearly have huge hearts
Yes.
and probably are not in it to make millions of dollars, right? They want to help, they want to give, they want to donate.
Sure.
How do you manage the emotions in that setting?
I'm a big believer in environment, and I think you experienced it, Darren, when you stepped foot on that ranch. People want to be part of something that creates respect and creates dignity, but also creates a sense of inspiration. And whether it be our ranch setting, whether it be some of our other offices, it starts there, not only in what people see and experience, but then the amount of respect in which they're shown. This was funny, I'll share this, it just happened today, but we have a couple new caseworkers that are part of our Goshen Homes team. They work directly with foster parents who in some cases have 3, 4, or 5 children in their home. They have a really important job. Young lady came up to me. She said, "I want to thank you." She goes, "I appreciate how personable you are. You've really made myself comfortable in these first few weeks here at Goshen." She goes, "I've never met a CEO like that before." And for me, CEO is as much kind of that chief encouragement officer. How do I ensure that this is an environment that is safe, an environment that is set up for people to be successful? If you ask me what's my goal day in and day out, it's to help the people around me be successful. Whether that's this young lady who's just started or someone that I've worked with for 15 years.
So that's a much newer mentality.
Yeah.
For sure. Because even when I started, I graduated in '02, and I think about my previous bosses, owners of the company. I never worked for any large corporation, right? But they ruled with like an iron fist.
Yeah, fear,
100%. And it was not encouragement. It was not, if they had to help you, or there was a chain of command, right? Like you had to go through a certain process to even like talk to your boss in a lot of cases. There was, so that attitude or that style is totally new. And where did that come from? Is that from your father as well?
Yeah, I think for me it comes from healthy systems. It's understanding not this that you've been trained for the role, but that you think big picture. And that big picture for me is that we always keep the relationship first. So if you're working in an environment where you know that your relationship is a trusted relationship and that those around you are seeking the very best outcome possible for you, then I think that you can also, in my position, not concern myself with, well, are people coming in the office on time? Are they working late? The quality of their work. The culture will present that over time. And those that maybe aren't will reveal themselves in their own way. So I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I also want to make sure that the system in which they communicate, the system in which they document, the system in which they may raise their hand and say, hey, I'm a little bit concerned or confused in terms of what this is or isn't, that they can do that freely so that those answers can be done. We are by far, we are not a perfect organization in any means. Again, very progress before perfection. Where we're learning. If I've done anything over my 15 years, I've tried to learn from the environments where maybe things haven't gone as well as I would wish and tried to teach those to our team.
Well, clearly you're doing a great job, a phenomenal job, I would say, because you guys have been ranked as one of the top places to work in the state of Georgia for a couple years.
Yeah, this will be our 5th year that we'll be recognized by the Atlanta Journal Constitution out of Atlanta as one of the top workplaces. I think last year we were ranked 15th for small businesses in the state. It's all based off surveys that are done internally that are anonymous. To me, if we want to talk about being a place that serves children well, that provides the type of hope and healing that Goshen wants to provide, we better be able to offer that to the people that are working there too. If you can't, that's going to reveal itself over time. So, we take morale very seriously.
So that's one of the M's.
Yes.
Okay, let's start with mission.
Yeah.
How do you create a mission?
Well, you create a mission, I believe, built out of vision, built out of being inspired. People live through circumstances in life where they feel like, man, I want to take what I've had and what I've experienced and share that and try to, in a way, create places where people can, experience, some degree of help as a result. For my father, he worked in an orphanage in Mexico when he was in college with, children that didn't have arms and legs. And for him, that was a moment where being in that type of setting, seeing just the experiences of what that place was like and what he learned. I know in the back of his head, he said, if I could ever be in a position to start something myself that could serve children that are in need. So that was kind of the birth. That was the birth of Goshen Valley, the birth of the mission. I will say, whether it's a mission, whether it's a product, often it is very important to the person that's starting it, but it may not be clear to the people around them. So the clarity of mission is so important, especially on the front end, that you're able to communicate it in writing, spoken, in large crowds, intimately. Being able to take what it is that you either believe in or maybe what you sell, and be able to share that with a platform of confidence through clarity is really king. The other piece is it needs to be inspirational. That doesn't mean that you have to kind of talk about it in a way that is prideful, as much as you want to be able to make it clear to people what the impact of that organization is. In our case, we love to highlight the young men that graduate high school. For many of them, when they arrived, they were 2 or 3 years behind educationally. To think that on their own they could get caught up, they could live within a family environment, they could understand the importance of education, they could pass tests along the way. So being able to say, hey, this is our mission, but also this is why it's important, this is why people should take interest in it, is something that you have to live out day in and day out. It is at the core of your being, especially if you're going to try your very best to be identified by it in ways in which our team is identified by Goshen.
Wow. Talk to me about margin. I mean,
Yeah.
you've touched on it.
Yeah.
You've got payrolls to make.
Yeah.
You've got counselors to pay.
Sure.
Who work on. I understand that you have contractors and then some that are like W-2 type employees.
Yeah, Goshen today has over 115 full-time employees. We've got about 50 contractors. We have foster parents that receive per diem for their services.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to be an environment that can not only provide them a career, but also year to year provide them increase. We want to be an environment that can provide quality benefits. We want to be in an environment that can afford increases to property and casualty year to year. We want to have work environments that people are proud of. So being able to understand resources and manage them really well, Darren, where we're not engaging in mission that doesn't have a margin component, we can't work ourselves, we could work ourselves out of business, out of ministry, if we just lean completely into mission without an understanding of where the margin's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So for organizations that are thinking about what it looks like as a nonprofit to get off the ground, and it's solely based off donation, what I would say is you need to be thinking about 3 or 4 different ways in which you engage people around giving. There's a lot of local churches today that are struggling because they have one component, and that's expecting their church members to give.
Right.
I think that when possible, diversifying revenue streams where you may have the ability to have certain contracts, you may have the opportunity to, in our case, bill insurance, you may have the opportunity to seek certain grants, you may be in the opportunity to put on an event. But if you're not really skilled on the front end in terms of how you're going to raise resources and put yourself in a position to sustain either the nonprofit or the small business, in a lot of cases you can work your way out of that opportunity. And it's not because you're not really well intended.
Right.
It's just because things are more and more expensive. And you have to balance mission and margin to be able to understand longer term scalability.
And so you think about, you hit the nail on the head as far as my next thought was, everything's so much more expensive these days. No matter what you're doing, it's more costly. You guys have been able to exceed
Yeah.
sort of the pace of inflation, if you will,
Yeah.
by creating more revenue streams, by expanding what you're doing, and clearly doing a hell of a job doing it.
Yeah.
So kudos to you, and thank you for sharing that.
Well, part of it too, Darren, and I know you experience this in your line of work, with mortgage rate. The greatest referral is that from someone that you worked with.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Sure.
So it's no different for Goshen, whether that's a volunteer, whether that's a donor, someone that attends one of our events. But when someone makes an investment in Goshen, I remember the day that you came out and participated when the winters were kind enough to replace the roofs through Terminus. I don't want that to look like a donation. I want that to feel like an investment.
Mm-hmm.
When people give to Goshen, I want them to understand that it is an investment where then you and I are now in agreement that there has to be a return on that investment.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be hope and healing. There has to be peace and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be care for that facility. And that you then, as the individual that's making things possible for me,
Mm-hmm.
can watch that investment grow
Mm-hmm.
and prosper just like you would, with a 401k.
Right.
With an account where you've invested financially and you expect returns.
Sure.
I want people that invest in Goshen to expect returns.
Right. So I think about it from, as you're aware, I run a 501c3.
Yeah.
Every link matters.
Yeah.
And we
Put on a great golf
we
tournament.
put on an event. That's our primary source of income for the year, on top of donations. And it's not a full-time job by any stretch of the imagination, but what I talk about is holding us accountable.
Yeah.
So I like your saying better is
Investment.
Let me give you a return on your investment
Yeah.
in Every Link Matters.
Yeah.
So
Giving too often.
that alone was worth it to me right here having this conversation.
Well, when you give someone a gift, you don't expect anything in return.
Right.
Here's a gift. I don't want that. I want a relationship.
Right.
I want that investment to lead to a longer term way in which you can look back and say, wow, Goshen, you have grown.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen you be able to scale into these other parts of the state. Or I have seen services kind of bubble up. We're at a point now where our services, not just intended for kids in foster care. I want to serve children in Woodmont or Bridgemill, or Hawks Ridge, children that might be going through a circumstance where they need to speak to a counselor.
Right.
That wasn't on our horizon 10 years ago.
Sure.
Now we're at a point because of people like yourself who had said, I believe in what you do, that we're really growing to be what our community ultimately will really need.
Well, let me ask you this. So with the growth,
Yeah.
with, it's under one
It's under the
entity at the moment, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere you turn, private equity is coming in
Yeah.
and offering up, it seems like, blue collar type, and I say, service companies, HVAC, roofing,
Yeah.
dentistry. I mean, they're buying up, it seems like, everything with if you were to spin that off,
Yeah.
how do you manage sort of, not the greed isn't the word I'm looking for, but how do you manage sort of not wanting to go down that route? How do you, again, I'm having a hard time.
The best way I can answer that, and being honest, we've had private equity groups approach us specifically around some of our mental health work. And what I know in the season that we're in, that I and Goshen, much more driven on the concept of transformation than transactional.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to be a place where every 15 minutes someone's shuffling in and out of an office.
Right.
We want to be a place where a child can get as much attention, where a single mom can get as much attention, where a family can get as much attention as they need, often free or reduced in terms of the cost, than to turn it over to someone that will think bottom line.
Yeah.
Do we think margin? Absolutely we think margin, because we need to think about how we provide those types of services at scale. But the fact that we don't have equity partners who are expecting something at the end of the year, as much as we have a community who is leaning on us to be able to continue to grow and meet the needs that exist more than ever in Cherokee County and beyond,
Yeah.
my heart is transformation. And I would say it's the same for my team.
Right.
And that's why Goshen is so comfortable working in the setting that we work as a nonprofit.
So clearly, you're the right man for the job, but I can I feel confident, had there not been somebody in that position who doesn't have that transformation first heart,
Yeah.
they would have spun off, something would have happened, and sort of everything that you and your family have built,
Yeah.
could really be tarnished.
Yeah.
So again, just amazing job by you to sort of toe that line and continue down and follow that mission for long term. Now you mentioned, getting back to community a little bit.
Yeah.
So now that you've created this unbelievable community-based
Yeah.
business foundation, what is it like managing the expectations of the community?
That's a great question. I try to be as in touch with Cherokee County, especially as much as possible. I serve on the educational, foundation board. I've served on the chamber board in the past. I'm a part of the Office of Economic Development. I want to be very clear in that Goshen has a mission, but as much as possible, if that can fit into what's happening within our home community, we're going to do that. Recently, I mentioned we've opened up a satellite office in Bartow County.
Yeah.
That's been an interesting experience because although it's only 30 minutes down the road, sometimes I feel like I'm in Charlotte, where it's a new chamber director, and it's a new county government, and it's a new local sheriff, and I am trying to do the very best I can to introduce Goshen, but do it in a way where all that funnels through the existing nonprofits. I don't want to. I shouldn't think that I just know it all and kind of come in and kind of like hang a placard and say,
Sure.
Hey, we're open for business. So I'm really trying to make a point to meet with the nonprofits, meet with some of the local churches, and understand the needs of Bartow County.
Right.
So that will it take 20 years to kind of build kind of the momentum that we built in Cherokee? I don't think so. But I want to do it the right way,
Right.
and do it, with the sense that first and foremost, we have the community's needs in mind.
Bartow,
Yeah.
I love Bartow County. That whole northwest corridor,
Sure.
I think, is just unbelievable for opportunity for whether it's a foundation, whether it's small business, whether it's
Home
corporations,
sales.
everything across the board. I do think, and this brings up, all communities have a little bit of like protectionism.
Yeah.
Where they don't want sort of an outsider coming in.
Right.
And that's a tough one because you mentioned, will it take 20 years? And with my experience with Bartow County, I don't know. I may take the over on that.
Well, there's certainly competition, even in nonprofits.
I was just going to say that.
With the sense of raising resources, with the sense of services that we want to be able to provide that maybe other agencies are currently. So we do that thoughtfully, but if we know that there are communities that currently specifically have children that are in need,
Sure.
I am somewhat kind of unabashed in the sense of, play me, coach. Like, how can Goshen,
Right.
not with pride as much as with purpose?
Right.
And my hope is that we'll experience that in Cartersville. And really, if you look at our family resource model in Canton, where we took a 6,500 square foot building that was really underutilized and purchased it in partnership with the county, raised resources to renovate it, where if you walked in there today, Darren, and doors are closed and counselors are meeting with kids and families, I believe that we're called to replicate that. And I would like to see an FRC in Cartersville and in Calhoun and in Dalton and in Chattanooga, up and down 75, Ackworth, Kennesaw. So communities can be defined by their Goshen.
But you need to partner
Yes.
with the right individuals, right?
Yes.
And that's got to be incredibly important in your line of work.
Very much so. A great partner both understands how their resource or their time or energy leverages our work and gives us, I think, the fuel to think, above and beyond where we may be today. But at the same time, we have to ensure that that partner creates kind of the avenue where they themselves can feel that effect. One way we do that is we create, days where corporations can come to our boys ranch. They can serve, spend the day with us, meaningful service, working on our property, meeting some of our staff, leaving it better than you found it, allow that to be part of your culture. Meanwhile, believing in the work of our mission and being able to fuel, where we head next.
So does that mean there's a Goshen Valley Boys Ranch Cartersville on the horizon?
I don't know about Boys Ranch. It's such a unique environment, and it's a very expensive model. Not only the property itself, but we still work with house parents. Couples that come from all over the country to work on the ranch that live with those boys kind of as their own. I do think we'll be populating more and more foster homes. That's already happened. We're projecting to, I think, open maybe 3 times as many as we opened last year in 2025, with a lot of our energy focused on kind of the Bartow County, Paulding County area. Those homes can serve both boys and girls. In many cases, almost every case, they serve siblings who otherwise would be likely separated and instead are together. So if we can continue to grow our foster homes as a way to ensure that we're always meeting kind of that need in which Goshen was birthed out of, it can still allow us to think how preventative-based services can be as much a priority going forward.
What does the foster home look like? As far as like how many units, how many people kids does it hold? I mean, how many?
So we have a variety. We have couples, we have individuals. They have to go through a kind of a rigorous training at times. It's called NTDC, is the acronym, and that's like a 5 to 6 week process where they get really educated both on kind of the needs of the kids, on the ways in which they can engage, respond. There's a trauma-informed aspect where we want to think not just what did that child do, but why did they do it, maybe what's happened in their past that triggered that response. So we want to highly educate them. We don't educate our foster parents in a weekend. We educate them over several weeks. We then ensure that they have the support once they're licensed, including a caseworker, who will work with maybe 2 or 3 families at a time, but will be that kind of immediate outlet related to things related to school, courts, CASA, primary care. Just recently, Goshen's one of the first agencies to have its own primary care in-house. We also have therapy, obviously, in-house. But we want to equip those families to do work at, first and foremost, a relational level. If you're always worried about the logistics, then you miss on the relationship.
Is that something that costs to train? I mean, it costs you all, obviously, but I mean, it's cost the foster parent?
There's no cost associated with training, and there are resources available to the family once they're trained to be able to support the needs of the child, themselves as well in some cases, to ensure that, again, they're not kind of consumed with kind of the downside of how do I step into the lives of these kids, as much as they have a support mechanism where they can do it to the very best of themselves. And we're seeing that. Just recently we had a couple, they actually go to Woodstock City Church. They had a sibling set of 5 children in their home, and all 5 had the opportunity the week before Christmas to go to an adopted family. Which was something we celebrated, and it was exciting because this had been kind of in the works for about a year. So at that point, I expected the family to take a couple months, like, hey, relax, catch up with yourselves. 3 days later, they took a sibling group of 6.
Wow!
And just amazing people, who, with the support of Goshen, feel compelled that they can step into the needs of these children at a very high level.
How do you replicate yourself and your energy there's only one Zach blend, and of course as a CEO you're going to need multiple people especially with the growth that you're wanting all the way up the Northwest Corridor. How do you train people to have those relationships, go out and make these relationships with the county commissioners, with the police officers, the sheriffs and so forth? Is that something that you all train, or is that just interviewing and finding the right person?
The first thing that's important to me is that when those relationships happen, that when they're passed on to, in some cases, our development team or our recruitment team, I expect that those relationships are cared for carefully.
Sure.
I want people to either, even though they may have met me, they're now working with someone else, that they understand that what they really met is Goshen, and that Goshen is going to be very mindful of, whatever the circumstance might be, and trying to get them, as involved as possible. I tell people that whenever we are out in the community, we are on, and I've had to work on that, Darren. For a long time, I'd be out, on a Friday night with my family, and it had been a tough week, and people will come up and say, "Hey, Zach, how's Goshen?" And part of me wants to say, you know what, Goshen's really tough right now. But
Sure.
I try to be as encouraging to knowing that Goshen is obviously something that's important to them.
Right.
So holding true to that, and holding true that we've been given something very special and unique to take hold of and to protect and to share, is certainly something we train, whether it be our leadership at the ranch or in our foster homes, our development team that put on some amazing events where people engage with us, not only to raise resources, but to also, I think, feel the spirit and the excellence of our program. All of that needs to be done in a way where there's dignity involved and a quality of just joy that we should all have in being able to work for and be part of a mission that is as quality as Goshen.
We didn't touch on compliance, but I think, that's probably a whole nother episode. We want to get into that.
Yeah.
But where can people, as we wrap up, where can people find you? How can they help? How can they serve Goshen? And maybe not Goshen, but other places in their communities that aren't down the street from here, or if you're not in Cherokee County, where can they go? What's the first place they should do? First thing they should do.
First place they can go is goshenvalley.org, and that highlights all of our agencies. We'll also have links for those of you that may be interested in fostering. It will literally take you step by step through what that journey would look like. Also on that site, you can learn more about two of our more kind of what I would call kind of premium events. One is the Goshen Valley Classic that's held at Cherokee Country Club in October. We also have an Evening with Goshen, which is our kind of our fourth quarter fundraiser that's really well received here in the Cherokee area. Personally, you can reach me at zblend@goshenvalley.org, and I would be happy to sit and talk about 3MC, whether it be with you individually or your company. How do you go from something that you're passionate about to something that's scalable and sustainable? But we're here in Cherokee County, hopefully abroad soon into the communities around us. And I want to thank you, Darren, because the work that you do here at Mortgage Right, you're very involved in the recruitment of the families that ultimately come in contact with Goshen. As Mortgage Right thinks about how do we have a product that encourages more and more families to move into Northwest Georgia, where they then might come in contact with Goshen, either in an attitude of service or fostering or investment. We're blessed with a community that's connected, that's collaborative, and no doubt you and your team have been part of that. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being a leader. Thank you for coming on to the podcast today. I can't thank you enough. I look forward to us communicating and collaborating on some more. And I want to remind you, though, there's one last thing I got to remind you of. It's kind of like my 5-foot putt. It's guaranteed.
Yeah.
That's a guaranteed episode. Subscribe, smash the like button. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.